Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. In just a minute, you'll see what we didn't show you last night from our interview with President Donald Trump. But first up, federal district court judge Derek Watson of Hawaii yesterday blocked President Trump's revised executive order on immigration. He said it violated the First Amendment rights of Muslims not in this country, but around the world, including those who've never set foot in America. The order's foes were quick to celebrate their win.
You cannot snap your fingers and make intent to discriminate go away simply by substituting one document for another.
We felt compelled to assure that we will not tolerate discrimination.
They were trying even harder to mask what was a religious animus, and animus just means, basically hostility.
This very, very important victory for the state of Hawaii and for the country of the United States of America.
One of those was the Attorney General of Hawaii. Well, President Trump, of course, blasted the ruling and signaled his intent to keep fighting for the executive order.
A judge has just blocked our executive order on travel and refugees coming into our country from certain countries. The order he blocked was a watered-down version of the first order. This is, in the opinion of many, an unprecedented judicial overreach.
Karen Tumlin is the legal director at the National Immigration Law Center, which supports Judge Watson's ruling, and she joins us now. Karen, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Looking forward to a respectful conversation, Tucker.
Oh, as always. I understand why people don't like the executive order, of course. We talked to a lot of people who don't. What I don't understand is the legal reasoning here. How does the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution apply to people in other countries who've never been here?
Well, actually, Tucker, in our case that was decided this morning by a district court judge in Maryland, the premise of the First Amendment argument actually is grounded in U.S. citizens and other residents who are inside of the country, but whose relatives are seeking to come in and who are Muslim.
Right, but they're not U.S. citizens and they're not in the country. But we're now expanding, or this judge or these judges are now expanding the coverage of the First Amendment to our Constitution to foreigners who aren't here, have never been here, and have no legal right to be here. How does that work?
Well, that's actually not what's working at all. So again, the Constitution, one of the things that's actually fundamental about it is that almost all of what we consider the Bill of Rights talks in language of persons. So right. Of course it doesn't protect only U.S. citizens. And like I was explaining, one of our plaintiffs in the case that was decided in the wee hours of the morning in Maryland involves individuals like Jane Doe 2, who is a permanent resident here in the United States and whose sister is abroad and who's seeking to come in as a refugee. Right. So to kind of twist and say these cases are only about folks outside of the U.S. with no connection here, who don't have family, who has a right to reunify is actually a misreading of the law.
Okay. Well, there's no constitutional right to reunify, as you know, and this decision is rooted in a reading of the Constitution, which, again, for the third time, I don't think I'm misreading it, extends that constitutional right to a non-citizen who's not in the country. That's not the traditional way we understand it. And my question is, does that mean that the other First Amendment rights, the right to the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, do we guarantee those also for people who aren't here? Think about the ramifications of this.
So here's what's really in the court's rulings. And so here we have so far on Muslim Ban 2.0, 2 rulings, one in Hawaii and one in Maryland. Right. And what they say is a key principle of what our country was founded on is you can't have a state-sanctioned policy that disparages or disfavors a religion. And there's evidence that that's what Muslim Ban 1 and Muslim Ban 2 was intended to do with respect to Islam. And for that reason, it must be blocked. That's what happened in court. So
there, again, that doesn't get past the First Amendment problem, which I think going forward could be it's a massive obligation to the rest of the world that we should think through before we applaud this decision. But let's get to what you just said, the reasoning behind this decision. Now, I'm reading, this is the Hawaii decision. It says that the executive order was issued with a purpose to disfavor a particular religion in spite of its stated religiously neutral purpose. In other words, we're inferring the motive of the people who wrote it based on, I don't know, news stories, clairvoyance, our own deep insight into human nature. How exactly would they know that? I mean, that's kind of a reach, no?
Not at all. I mean, unfortunately, the truth is that there is an incredibly long trail of evidence from the president himself. When he was a candidate, when he was campaigning, he pledged that one of the key things he would do as president was to enact a far-reaching Muslim ban. And the courts have looked at all of this evidence on the campaign trail, in the executive order itself, statements made by the drafters afterwards, statements made by the president, and said this is the highly unique case where we can tell, and it's clear under the law, that this intent here was to disparage Islam and to ban Muslims.
It's just hilarious that they somehow know. I mean, first of all, this is not a far-reaching Muslim ban, as you know. It applies to 6 countries that do not constitute the majority or even close of Muslims around the world, but that they can know what's in the heart of the person who wrote it. I'm not sure that's a precedent we want to run with for future decisions, or maybe you think it is.
I mean, I actually think it is. I mean, again, one of the beauties of the Constitution is you don't have to violate the constitutional rights of every person in the United States to violate the Constitution. If someone violates your free speech rights, Tucker, that's a violation, regardless of whether they violate mine.
Right. So I mean, I can see that you're making the argument that, you know, Trump has all kinds of bad intentions. Okay, we could debate that. You don't like the ban, fine. But I don't understand where in the Constitution it says that people from Somalia have a right to come to the United States. Where I haven't seen, where is that?
So again, that's not what the courts are finding. What they're finding is in the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, which in fact, right, the founders of our country were fleeing religious persecution. And in their wisdom, they said, we don't want a government that either puts on a pedestal or disparages a certain religion, because we know what the consequences of that are. And that's what the decisions are saying. They're saying no one's above that basic constitutional boundary, even the president.
No, it's saying that no one around the world is not covered by the U.S. Constitution. And so, like, if you apply the standard, look, again, not just with reference to this case, but because court cases do establish precedents that future generations build upon, I think it's worth unpacking a little bit. So we've instituted bombing campaigns, more than 20 of them over the past 25 years, against Muslim-majority countries. In fact, I think exclusively against Muslim-majority countries. And we've been doing that because of religious problems in those countries. Under this standard, a judge, some random judge somewhere could say, no, you cannot go to war, pick a country, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, because it has a disproportionate impact on Muslims. It's anti-Muslim. Don't you see that could be a problem?
Look, I actually think that's really extreme. I think that one thing that you and I can definitely both agree on is that we want this country to be safe, and we can agree on the rule of law. And unfortunately, you know, as someone who's before these courts all the time, that's not what you get from one decision, that you get this outrageous boundary stretch. What we've got from these decisions is, and again, taking the case that I've been working on, the court said your specific plaintiffs have a right to bring this lawsuit because of their connections to the United States. And based on the evidence, I see a violation here. I see an executive order based on its evidence that disparages Islam.
But look, you say that's, I'm stretching it. If you had told any person you meet on the street 2 years ago that some judge would say that Somalis who've never been to this country are covered by the U.S. First Amendment, you would get blank stares, and people would say that would never happen. Let me ask you this. Doesn't this empower judges in a way that's uncomfortable? So Trump has got over 100 judicial appointments to make, 123, I think. Probably mostly be conservative. What in 2 years, one of them decides, you know what, I don't like American abortion law. And I think it's discriminatory against unborn children, and I'm going to invalidate it unilaterally because I'm a judge, and now I have this power. I can change our immigration policy because I'm a judge. That's not the way the country's supposed to run, is it?
Well, that's not the way I view judges, right? I appear before judges all the time, and I don't see them adhering wildly to political beliefs. I see smart judges who've been appointed by presidents on both sides of the aisle. And so, again, I don't buy into that as the ramification. I think if you had told people 2 years ago that we would have a president who made it a hallmark of his campaign to disparage a religion and to make a difference between people in this country based on how they choose to pray, I think you would have gotten blank stares.
Okay, last question. So you think it's unconstitutional for the United States president or Congress, or how about citizens, to make a meaningful distinction between immigrants from Somalia and immigrants from Norway? We're not allowed to say there's a difference. There's a difference in effect on the people who already live here. That's unconstitutional?
At no time did I say that. That's the basic conflation. That's a problem with this executive order. What I'm saying is the fundamental principle of the First Amendment Establishment Clause is the U.S. government cannot favor or disparage a religion. You talked about countries.
So
I'm talking about freedom to pray.
So for like 20 years, the official U.S. policy was to give preference in emigration from the Soviet Union to the United States to Jews living in a very anti-Semitic world under Soviet communism. And that was our policy. Do you think that was unconstitutional?
I think you're citing the Lautenberg Amendment, which was duly passed by Congress after specific evidence of persecution of a specific group, and I do not think that was unconstitutional. I think it was a specific legislated bicameral response to a problem of persecution.
Not true. That was happening long before Frank Lautenberg was serving in the Senate. And it made common sense. These are people who are suffering because of their religion. I mean, religion played a role in the decision, and nobody said boo because it was the right thing to do. So, but that's unconstitutional now.
No, no one said that's unconstitutional now. That was based on findings of fact and a legislative process. This is the stroke of a presidential pen without those basic foundations.
All right. Karen, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tucker.